Understanding Cognitive Development and Learning Theories by Kelly Jones. In this presentation, we will be looking at various learning theories. Jean Piaget was a Swiss-born biologist and psychologist who had a great interest in how human intelligence develops, primarily how children develop skills, process information, and use observational skills as they grow from birth to adulthood. Piaget suggested that children categorize the knowledge they amass through experience and interactions into schemas. When new information is gathered, it can either be assimilated into an existing schema or accommodated by updating an existing schema or creating a new one. After observing the intellectual development of his own children, he devised a four-stage theory to outline the developmental thought process. The four stages are the sensio-motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. Piaget devised a number of experiments to further explore his constructivist approach to learning theory. These experiments serve to support Piaget's views, although further experiments and theorists have criticized the accuracy of his work. Piaget used an object permanence experiment to observe the skill set of the sensio-motor stage. By showing a toy to the child, then hiding the toy under a blanket, Piaget was able to observe whether the child believed the toy had disappeared or whether they opted to look for it. The younger infants lost interest in the toy once it was hidden, believing that if they could not see it, it no longer exists. The older infants continued to look for the toy, understanding that it still existed, even though it was not in their sight. At the pre-operational stage, Piaget used the three mountain tasks to observe egocentrism he believed this age exhibited. The children were unable to show the dolls or the adult's point of view. They was only able to describe or pick the picture showing their own point of view. Other experiments include using 2 glasses of water, one filled to the exact same amount, and transferring to a different shaped glass and determine whether the child believed the water was still the same amount, more or less in the glass remaining. The pre-operational age group's inability to decenter and think logically strengthened his belief of egocentrism in the age groups of 2 to 7. As the stages continued, the children were able to understand the experiment and logically work out the correct answers. This led to the concrete operational stage and further to the formal operational stage. Other theorists who have similar thoughts in structural development include Jerome Bruner, another structural theorist, although he believed learning is an active process for which learners construct new information and ideas based on current and past knowledge. He devised 3 modes of learning: enactive, learning through movement; iconic, learning through images and pictures; and symbolic, learning through abstract signals. Martin Hughes developed a study called the policeman doll study, as he believed the children would do better if they understood exactly what was being asked of them. By explaining the characters of the naughty policeman and the doll, the children were able to relate to the doll and were more capable of hiding the doll from the policeman, which proved they was able to understand more of their supposed cognitive state than Piaget originally thought. Operant conditioning was originated by B.F. Skinner. Operant conditioning is based on the voluntary behaviour. The basic feature of operant conditioning is reinforcement. It is described as a process that attempts to modify behaviour through the use of negative and positive reinforcement. Skinner proved his theory with a number of experiments based on rats. The rats were shocked with an electric current, negative reinforcement. Once they pulled the lever, the electric shock stopped and they were rewarded with food and water. Positive reinforcement. Examples for classroom use. A child who has helped in class or completed all their homework on time may be rewarded with a positive reinforcement, such as a certificate or a star on the wall, which will give them a sense of pride and achievement, reinforcing them to continue this positive behaviour. Other children will see this reward and work harder to gain the positive rewards themselves. Negative reinforcement is all about subtraction and not to be confused with sanctions or punishments. A sanction is where you take something away which reduces the probability of the good behaviour. An example of negative reinforcement. If the class has been working really hard and have excelled in their listening or classwork, you can decide to take away a spelling test for the afternoon or homework. Therefore, taking away something they may not enjoy, so they see as a negative, will encourage more hard work and listening, as they remember the last time they behaved that way, they were rewarded with a negative reinforcement. Natural operants, responses from the environment that neither increase or decrease the probability of a behaviour being repeated. Reinforcers, responses from the environment that increase the probability of a behaviour being repeated. Reinforcers can either be positive or negative. Punishers, responses from the environment that decrease the likelihood of behaviour being repeated. Punishment weakens behaviour. Classical conditioning. Discovered by M. Pavlov, classical conditioning is a process that occurs with an association of an elemental stimulus and a naturally occurring stimulus. Pavlov's experiments were based on the amount a dog salivated when being fed. He applied a tube to the dog's mouth to measure the amount of saliva when food is produced. After recording the amount, he introduced an elemental stimulus, such as the signal of a tongue, before the food was served. The naturally occurring reflex was salivation. By associating the first elemental stimulus, the tone, with the second elemental stimulus, food, the dogs began to salivate at the sound of the tone rather than only when presented with food. This kind of conditioning can also be linked with school activities such as tests. If students were conditioned to take hard tests in stressful and limited time frames, they would associate all tests with stress. By partnering this classical conditioning technique with operant conditioning, you may be able to reverse the learned conditioning of associating stress with exams. This is also called extinction, so a behaviour which is learned can be unlearned. Some other associated terms of learning theory. Continuous reinforcement. When you reinforce the correct behaviour continuously and immediately. Intermittent reinforcement. When you reinforce certain behaviours or skill learning to maintain an already learnt behaviour. Shaping. Reinforcing efforts for targeted behaviours such as waiting their turn or putting hands up in class. This can be a positive reinforcement for someone who struggles to wait their turn, or a negative reinforcement where the child who consistently waits their turn is not rewarded and will begin to shout out or push in. Now we look at a short comparison of some other examples of learning theory. Bandura. Through an experiment known as the Bobo doll, Bandura tested his theory on children mimicking an adult's behaviour after witnessing how they behaved towards the doll. Most of the children observed the doll being violent and aggressive, repeated the same behaviour towards the doll when left with it. Those children observing an adult showing kindness to the doll also repeated this behaviour, allowing Bandura's theory that children will mimic and repeat what they hear socially. Vygotsky was also interested in the social aspect of children's learning. He argued that Piaget's theory was not strong due to the cultural and social aspects of the children Piaget observed. Piaget's observations were based on his own middle-class children and family. Vygotsky argued that social learning begins before the developmental learning. Vygotsky theorized that development differs across cultures, where Piaget's theory is a more universal development across cultures. Vygotsky believed that the environment that children grew up in played a major role in how and what they will learn. In Vygotsky's theory, infants already have the ability for intellectual development. These are the elementary mental functions: attention, sensation, perception, and memory. As the child grows in their social-cultural environment, these functions develop into higher mental functions. As the children continue to learn, they will understand and develop more with the help from an MKO, more knowledgeable other. This can be a parent, teacher, peer, or a child. They will watch and listen and obtain the knowledge from the more knowledgeable other until they are able to process it and confidently do it themselves. Another theory that describes thought processing is the information process theory associated with John William Atkinson and Richard Shiffen. The brain is seen as a computer. The information is attained from a stimuli such as the environment and input into the mind either as new information or to alter previous information. Then it will be stored either as short-term memory, long-term memory, and then the output will be using the information when needed. This theory technically is part of every developmental theory, understanding whether the information comes from experience, a more knowledgeable other, social, cultural, or behavioural stimuli. It will still require inputting, storage, and eventually outputting. Thank you very much.